What's up, metal and heavy music fans? It's FlightOfIcarus again from metaltrenches.com. As always, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to the channel and like the video if you enjoy it. But it's time for another edition of Bands That Changed My Life, where I talk about bands, artists, albums that really had a lasting, instantaneous effect on the trajectory of my musical tastes. And the topic of today's video is Between the Buried and Me. Now, I remember the moment getting into these guys. It was about 2003, 2004, starting to wrap up my high school years. And at this point, I was deep into my metalcore phase, one that never truly ends, I suppose, at the time with bands like Poison the Well, Darkest Hour, As I Lay Dying, Bleeding Through, etc. And I was just starting to discover new subgenres and kind of branch out. And there was a particular small CD and record store not too far from us that had a dedicated metal section that you could browse through. They also had one of those listening stations, and it wasn't just the one too where it was just like the store owner's picks or whatever, and you could just listen to whatever they put up. Like, you could literally grab any CD in the store, bring it up to the shelf, and they would let you listen to it, which was really amazing. And so often we just kind of look through and find cool album covers that were intriguing and see what the band sounded like. Or we dig up bands that we had seen in the inserts that would come in the CDs of the other bands that we would buy to kind of lead you down a breadcrumb trail towards other bands often on the same label or at least of the same style. And this is the way in which I came across Between the Buried and Me's The Silent Circus. And now I couldn't tell you exactly what spurred me to check out this album, but needless to say, I took it up to the counter, and once again, if you've been watching this series of videos, had my mind completely blown apart. And if you've heard this album, you know what I'm talking about, because it opens with that sort of distant, shrieking guitar that slowly gets a little bit louder and louder. And the more I think about it, the more it reminds me of those screamer pop-ups that we'd send around in email and just on various places of the internet to scare each other. You know, it's got the pop-up picture of Linda Blair from The Exorcist with that really loud scream that goes along with it. That's the classic one. It kind of reminds me of that, because you get pulled in and you're sort of straining your ears as you're hearing this distant guitar just sort of fading in, and the guitars just start to add up a little bit more, and just long enough for when that death metal drop comes in, it seriously fucks you up. Now, mind you, too, I believe this and Hot Damn from Every Time I Die were my first forays into what I'd eventually learn to call mathcore. Like, I didn't have a term for it at that point because I was so new to it. I hadn't even discovered the Dillinger Escape Plan yet. And by the way, check out the other episode I did talking about them if you enjoy this one. But in any case, you'd better believe in that context, I had never heard anything like this before. The crazy alternations between the squelchy high vocals and the brutal low growls, and then the ridiculous drumming, were enough to twist my head right off my shoulders. And then all of a sudden they throw you for a loop again around 1 minute and 15 seconds with that slower, proggy melodic part that comes in. Just absolutely mind-boggling stuff for a 17-year-old who was used to things like All That Remains and Lamb of God at the time. And then there's a clapping break? I mean, it was like...
What is that? What the fuck is that?
I didn't even know what to do with this. I'm like kind of chuckling, but also like really intrigued, banging my head, also just totally confused. It was definitely one of those defining moments where everything I thought about songwriting up to that point went completely out the window. And so many memorable parts that were instantly cemented into my brain. Like, I will never forget the great transition that happens around 1 minute and 45 seconds of B Enable Phobia, where they start that great kind of 8-chord buildup that just gets faster and faster, plus that little bass guitar moment that happens there. And then there's that ridiculous drum part that kicks off Mordecai. And which remains to this day one of my favorite Between the Buried and Me songs of all time. That one alone really is like a time capsule summary of what this album is all about, distilled down into just under 6 minutes. I could honestly probably just do an entire video breaking down that one track, from the ridiculous death metal opening to the amazing transition to the jazzy cleans that happens later on. And again, first listen, like what is this? I don't I don't understand. Like, I'm used to bands that keep things relatively consistent. Like, they change up the pace and things like that now and then, but to just jump from style to style, like complete genre switches, was completely foreign to me at that point. So I really didn't know what to make of the singing when this part comes in too. Like, I was deep in my metalhead phase at that point, where like anything that wasn't metal was cast out, was not cool, was not something I was going to pay attention to. So that part of me wanted to hate it at first, but I literally could not stop listening to it. I just kept coming back over and over and over again. And then you've got that peaceful serenity of Reaction and the almost dashboard confessional-esque acoustic of Chevenel Take 2 that come right after that, which only furthered my confusion while planting seeds that continued to open up new avenues for the future of my musical taste. It was that meme. But then just like that, they pull the rug out from under you once more with the jarring transition back to Ada de Glugmut. And fuck you if I'm not pronouncing that right. And let's face it, without the strangely poppy few minutes that precede that exact moment, this track doesn't pack half the punch. It's like a horror movie with jump scares every 2 seconds. I'm looking at you, the Conjuring universe. Versus one like The Exorcist 3 or The Shining. The former sort of desensitizes you over time to the point where there's really no effect. You're not really scared anymore. You're just knowing that it's coming, and so it ceases to have the same effect. While the latter makes you completely leap out of your seat after all of that quiet tension building because you're truly not expecting it. But yeah, once again, I could go on and on with this album, but the love train continued on with the release of Alaska. This album was definitely a less defining one for me, just because it didn't have that same initial, like, what is this effect? This obviously had me branch out into other bands in this style, and so I was a little bit more prepared going into Alaska, but I do remember all of the commercials leading up to it, watching MTV2 late at night in the dorms, usually sandwiched between episodes of Headbangers Ball, and they were featuring clips from the music video. I'd actually go so far to say that Alaska is the superior album overall when compared to The Silent Circus, but there's just a special place in my heart for that first cherry popper, so to speak. And as you probably already know if you clicked on this video, their discography only further blossoms from there. Colors was a massive peak for the band in my mind, and I think for a lot of people, and one of the albums that I probably listened to the most out of their discography. It was truly a monument in terms of their focus on progressive songwriting, melding each song together into a cohesive concept while also allowing for plenty of standout moments over the course of that time. Who doesn't remember jamming Prequel to the Sequel on Rock Band? And there's so much more to get into with this band, of course, but for the purposes of this video, I'm going to stop there, because this is really just meant to focus on that initial spark that these guys ignited in my musical taste. But don't worry, I really do want to do a follow-up attacking their full discography, since it is such a meaty one, and I kind of want to do it within the tier list format, so hopefully watch for that soon. Yeah, BTBAM kicks some serious ass even to this day, if you ask me. I'm excited to hear your own thoughts on that in the comments, since obviously they've gone through a lot of changes, especially in the last few years. What do you think about them? What's your favorite album out of their discography? Who are your defining bands and also the defining albums from back in the day that really set you on the path that you find yourself right now musically? And of course, while you're at it, be sure again to subscribe to the channel, like the video as well. There's plenty more like this one if you stick around, as well as reviews for newer underground bands, multi-band roundups, other recommendations, and also band interviews on the podcast, which I highly recommend checking out. But that'll do it for now. Thanks as always for watching. Again, hop down in the description to follow us on social media, sign up for the email list, and support us on Patreon or Subscribestar. Even just $1 a month makes a huge difference to me. Thanks so much to the loyal supporters that are already on there. This is Flight of Icarus, signing off. I will see you in the trenches.